This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
All organizations, whether profit-seeking or not, face change. Often this change is forced on from outside. It could be a change in the economic environment. It could be a change in the competition that they're having to deal with, a change in technology, a change in customers or clients' tastes. Sometimes the impetus for change comes from within. There's a change in management who have different ideas about maybe how the organization should progress. Maybe they think the organization would do better if it cut out some types of production and started other types of production, a change of emphasis, perhaps a change in the organization of the company, maybe from the tall, narrow to the wide, flat sort of organization. There are a number of ways in which change can be categorized. And the first here deals with automation, rationalization, and business process re-engineering. And it's really just putting labels on almost the degree of change, the seriousness of the change. So first of all, there is automation. This is of existing processes. An example of automation is simply having your wages and salaries calculations done by computer. We've long seen automation in supermarkets where as you scan items at the checkout, then the stock is automatically depleted in the records. And when the stock comes down to reorder level, then automatically an order is sent out to the supplier, which is essentially what was done under the manual systems. Rationalization takes a little bit further. It removes bottlenecks. It removes places where the processes could be held up somewhat. And if we turn back to the example we had on the supermarkets, even though we've automated that process, it is by no means without problems, because if the orders are going out when the stock goes down to the order level, then those orders are essentially being received by your suppliers more or less at random without any particular warning. And as soon as an order comes in, then maybe the supplier has to start manufacturing the stock, or certainly has to start taking the stock out of inventory, putting it onto lorries, getting those lorries going a couple of 100 kilometers to deliver the stock. So they're kind of maybe not a very good coordination between the supermarket placing the order and the supplier fulfilling it. What rationalization would mean instead is that you let the supplier monitor levels of stock in the supermarket, so the supplier can sit there kind of watching remotely the levels of inventory to which they are responsible falling down, and they can anticipate it getting to the reorder level, and therefore they can start manufacturing the inventory or start loading and transporting inventory in good time. And that would be an example of rationalization, really doing something rather better than just automating it. And finally, we have business process re-engineering. Business process re-engineering is a very radical change. The example which is often talked about was in Ford Motor Company, where Ford Motor Company, this is in Detroit in America, they had a very large factory, and very large factories had a very large accounts payable function dealing with purchases from their suppliers, and many suppliers. And they did a very traditional purchase payables function. You had the order, then you waited for the goods received note, made sure they match, and then you waited for the invoice and made sure you had 3 documents it matches. When the invoice came in, you had to do a lot of checking that they had the right prices, adding the things up, putting it on the credit of the payables ledger, and then eventually paying it. And there were about 400 people involved in this department, really just kind of matching bits of paper. And then they had the radical idea of saying, well, don't send us invoices. They said, we know we've ordered the goods, we know when we've received the goods, we know what price we're willing to pay for those goods, and then 30 days after receiving we'll pay you. And by leaving out essentially the invoicing and the purchase ledger, the payables ledger phases, they reduced that 400 down to, it is said, around 40 people. There is no hard and fast distinction between these two here. What is rationalization, what is BPR is not at all plain. It's really a matter of degree, and it doesn't really matter very much. Other categorizations of changes are as follows. It looks at the scope of change, how maybe fundamental the change is. Is the change going to affect maybe every department? Is it a change which is really affecting almost our generic strategies? We're moving from cost leadership to differentiation. And then there's the nature of change, which is really how fast the change is. Is it incremental or big bang? And it puts these into these four quadrants. And really what it's, I think, mainly mapping out is the amount of risk which is involved. So if we think about the top line here, they're both incremental changes. They are gradual changes. You have time, and probably it's reversible because you're going in a fairly gentle kind of a fashion. You haven't burnt your bridges, really. So you are changing one department, and you're changing it fairly gently, fairly slowly. That is known as adaptation. It's a very low risk sort of change. If the change doesn't go very well, certainly it's only the one department that's maybe affected. It's not a fundamental change. And because you're taking it carefully, kind of steadily, then if you see it going wrong, you have time to either correct the change or to reverse. Even when it comes up here, where you're changing the whole company, because there's obviously more risk there, because many stakeholders are going to be affected by this large scoped change which is there. But again, you're kind of taking it easy, maybe lots of consultation at each stage and lots of corrections and so on. The risk is still relatively low. Here we've had to, in a way, maybe to take kind of emergency action on one department. But it's very quick. Of course, if it's very quick, you are liable to get it wrong. If it's very quick, it may be very difficult to get out of that change and to kind of wind the clock back there. But at least we're saying here that damage, if there is any, is kind of limited in one department or limited to one set of stakeholders. Where you really need to worry here is revolution. A very fundamental, large change happening very, very quickly. Really very high risk that a lot of damage could be done to the organization and its performance. How do you remember these four names in here? Well, there's actually 8 names here. Well, there's incremental and big bang. I think that's okay. It's kind of slow or quick is really what we're saying, the nature of change. Scope of change or realignment just means, if you think of it, realigning maybe the heading of a boat, it's maybe making a very slight change, slight adjustment. Transformation implies everything's going to be changed, okay? But you can get from the top ones here, you can remember adaptation and evolution from really biological terms. Biologists talk about plants and animals adapting, or maybe plants and animals evolving, and both have the idea of going pretty slowly. If something adapts, then it's going to be, to maybe a slightly new climate, slightly new food source, and so on. Then it's essentially still the same species, but it's just adjusted very slightly how it's kind of surviving. Whereas evolution, biologists would say this is really the creation of a very different creature, but again, it's happening slowly. Revolution, I don't think we have any problems. We know what a revolution is. We know what a political revolution is. It's liable to be very quick, affecting the whole country. Sometimes they work better than others. And maybe the one that we have to work hardest at remembering is reconstruction, where we are attacking a relatively small part of the organization, but making a very fast change to it. How do we find what to change? What are the various methods maybe that we can try to use to see where changes should take place? And first of all, we can have what's called re-engineering, business process re-engineering, zero-based. And zero-based is really envisioning what the perfect organization would be. So knowing where we are now, ideally how would we organize the business? So we might have started the business off, let's say a small company making clothing in almost the center of a town. Many towns have got kind of traditional areas where maybe clothing manufacturing took place. But now we've grown, and now instead of having one building, we're kind of spread over 4 different buildings. Traffic patterns have changed. We can't get lorries in and out and so on. And you say, right, knowing the size I am now, knowing the amount of transport I need to get to my factory, how would I set up my operations? And it might be you would ideally set them up on the edge of town near kind of good road links and so on, lots and lots of space all in one building and so on. Now it may be very difficult to move to that, but at least this is our kind of perfect vision, and some organizations do grasp the nettle and make these very fundamental changes and change away from their original city of operation, sometimes away from their original country of operation as well. Simplification, look for duplication or redundant steps, and the sort of thing which is useful to look for there is every time a piece of inventory moves between departments, really there's 2 people involved. Somebody has to kind of do the dispatching, somebody has to do the receiving. Every time a piece of information is transmitted, we go through that communications process. Somebody has to go to the bother of encoding it and so on. Somebody else has to go to the bother of receiving and decoding it and so on. So every time information has to be shifted, there is work. So if you can cut down on the number of transfers of both material information, you're going to be simplifying and making stuff quicker and less error prone. Value-added analysis, look at what you're doing, see if there are any steps which can be eliminated without damaging the product which you're making or without damaging a customer's impression of that product. And finally, gaps and disconnects, look for where information or materials could be delayed or go missing. And again, every time you have to send from one department to another, there is a risk that the message, the information, the communication has some sort of breakdown within it, a barrier of communication comes in. There's a risk that the material is delayed as you go from one to the other. Material is received but then kind of put somewhere in the new department, kind of forgotten about, they don't know where it is. So we can look for kind of almost streamlining and simplifications as best we can. Strategic alignment is another way in which we can, or have to really, go about thinking about changes. It's the process of linking the organization's structure and resources and competences with its strategy and its business environment. So if the business environment dictates that there are now many competitors who are producing products at a very low price, maybe because they're producing these in countries with very low labor costs and so on, then part of our strategic alignment, or we should be thinking, do we need also maybe to move production to somewhere with equally low labor costs, because that's really the only way we're going to be competing. We've seen many organizations have embarked on some sort of internet presence and internet trading because that's basically what was dictated by their business environment. It's what competitors were doing. Customers expect to see maybe a site and to be able to order over the internet and so on. And we have to maybe change our structure. We have to bring in internet type resources and competences so we can embark on proper e-commerce. So we can't ignore what's happening outside. We have to keep adjusting. Sometimes it's going to be aligning, sometimes it's going to be more of a transformation to keep up to date with what will enable us really to be successful. The process change life cycle, pretty easy really to see what's going on here. How do we go about changing, or maybe so let's say implementing the internet trading system of that sort, example we're going to be kind of sticking with here. We have to first of all plan and define the goals. What are we going to be doing on our internet site? Is it just going to be a kind of advertising portal where we can let people see the goods, but then they have to ring up for those goods? Or is it going to be one where not only can they see the goods, but they can order the goods? Because there is a choice to be made there. And maybe we think it's very complicated, or for the particular goods which we are selling, maybe a lot of advice is needed to actually sell them directly over the internet. So we have to define where your goals are. Again, when you're thinking about that, maybe you think, what sort of pictures are we going to show people of our goods? Is it just going to be kind of front on? But you know that many goods now, when you see on the internet, you can kind of rotate them around and see them from all angles and so on. Are we going to allow people to choose the details of the product which they're ordering, the particular colour, the particular level of trim in a car, the extras in a car, and so on? First thing to do is to analyse existing activities, identifying problems with the existing system. So if we, for example, were wanting to offer people a way of customising the product over the internet, if we find it very difficult to customise the product at the moment, then putting an interface through the interface on internet in front of that isn't going to make it any easier, really. We would have to think about maybe reorganising the way our inventories work, reorganise the way our construction and manufacturing works. So some sort of flexible manufacturing system might be needed as well. We then design the new or improved processes, look at alternatives. Quite often it's not just one design and one price. Quite often you'll be presented with a range of different designs, maybe doing different things, but of course by and large different prices, and we have to find some kind of compromise. How sophisticated do we want the new system to be, given that what do customers perhaps want, what do we think is actually possible, what price do we have to pay, where we're going to be maximising our profit. Big development stage, we would be thinking, are we going to do it ourselves, or are we going to do it maybe in-house, outside, subcontracted? We would be thinking of then the implementation or the transition. This will include training people, include maybe testing software, might include bringing new machinery, reorganizing the siting of machinery. And then what we need to do is to review how well the new process is working. Let it settle down for a few weeks or even a few months there, and see, is it working well? Are there any other adjustments that we really need to be doing? Now, whenever change is suggested, there is always the risk, or really quite a big risk, that particularly employees, but also maybe customers, will resist change. And why they resist change is perfectly understandable. If you hear that a company is thinking of automating, then of course people worry that, well, automation means fewer people are going to be employed, my job is at risk, and therefore you resist it. Even if they think you're going to keep your job, it's probably going to be a different job, maybe not as interesting, maybe you're going to be broken away from old colleagues and so on there. Maybe you worry that you're going to have to work harder to get the same money. Maybe you worry that you won't be able to cope with the new job if it's bringing in new technology. Similarly, customers may initially resist change. So when many banks were changing from a kind of actually talking to people in a bank over a counter, and they were trying to get customers to move to telephone banking and internet banking and so on. There was a danger, of course, that many customers would resent that and not want to go for it. Maybe they thought, I can't work the internet. I don't want to be dealing with this. Maybe older customers, for example, would resist it. So this problem of recognizing there's probably going to be resistance and overcoming the resistance is very, very important. And a number of different models. Here we have Lewin's force field analysis. And Lewin said, look, here you have the forces for change. Okay, so the forces for change, maybe economic forces, maybe competitive forces, but broadly speaking, management should be seeing these occurrences on the horizon. And basically you've got management who tends to be forcing that way. So they've seen that they have to change if the organization is going to keep successful. And broadly what you have on the other side, if we just keep it employees, but remember it could be customers, you have got your kind of employees coming back here. Employees, and maybe they are represented by a very strong trade union and so on. And if you're not careful, management kind of forces itself this way, employees go kind of back the way there. And if you're not very careful, you get a bit of a standoff, a lot of aggression there. Neither side is willing to give way. And then the thing escalates into working to rule and strikes and so on. And even after these strikes are settled, there can still then be a feeling of maybe unfairness, certainly bad feeling can linger. And the whole thing is very disruptive to the organization. So what Lewin said was, rather than trying to go kind of head to head, be very kind of macho about it, he said what you should do as management is to aim to weaken the resistance to change. And how do we weaken the resistance to change? Well, there's about 4 ways, really, 4 words which are used in here. The first one can be education. So explain to people why change is needed. So rather than just saying, this is what we have to do, say, look, here's our latest results. Look, you see the sales are going down. You see the profits going down. The sales are going down because we are not maybe supplying the goods quickly enough, or maybe our goods are priced too highly compared to the competitors. If we don't do something, we will gradually go broke and you're all going to lose your jobs. Now, it's not nice news to hear, but if it is the truth, it is very persuasive that, you know, we don't like the change, we're not volunteering for the change, but let's do this or have something worse kind of thrust upon you. There is communication. It's kind of linked with education, but communication is maybe explaining to people what the change is going to be, or what you think it might be. So if you can actually communicate to people, no one's going to be made redundant, or there are going to be no compulsory redundancies, or we are going to offer full training to everybody in the new system, then maybe it takes a lot of the worry that was there, because people often assume the worst is going to happen. And then immensely important is participation. Allowing people to participate in the change process. Allow them, you know, a bit of bottom-up type of management, not just kind of top-down management. Now, if they're going to participate properly, they need to be educated, they need to be some communication going on about what might be possible and so on. But then have a discussion, so say to them, look, we're losing customers. We're losing customers because the product is priced too cheaply compared to these imports which we're now plagued with. What are your suggestions? And communication or participation then works in 2 ways. First of all, if you make a suggestion, really you're more likely to accept it. You're less likely to dislike it or resist it later on. After all, it is your suggestion. And of course, people prefer to feel that they are in some charge of their own destiny. They've made a suggestion, somebody's taken notice of it. It can be really quite motivating. And finally, then, I will say envision the future. So what you can say maybe to people, look, we're going to have a really tough 3 months. In this 3 months, we're going to make 10 people redundant, and we know you're going to be saying goodbye to friends, and we know there's a lot of tension before we decide who's going to be made redundant. And then we're going to bring in the new computer system, and there's going to be a process there of where you have to learn how to work that computer system, and it won't be very efficient at the start. But then you can say, look, in 3 months' time, all of this will be behind us, and you'll be working the new system, and you actually find it works very well. It's a better system than the old system. Be able to do the same work in less time. And best of all, when we go through this transition, we set ourselves up on a kind of profitable basis, then your jobs are safe in the future. So to get people over this tough point here, set up this vision of the future and let them try to focus on that rather than the shorter term nasty stuff. Lewin also had another model, very similar, I think, we think, to the force field model here. He said, first of all, you have to unfreeze. People have been really doing the same thing for the last 5 years. You have to get them ready for change. And this is really where you have a lot of the communication and the education and maybe the participation going on in here. Kind of soften them up, really. Say why change is needed, what you're planning, what are your ideas. And then you put the changes through. And this is the time of turmoil and difficulty and hard work. But then, very important, there is refreeze. And refreeze can be interpreted in 2 ways. First of all, make sure people settle down in and work in the new methods. They don't slide back. So if the change that we're putting through was to try to improve our customer handling, let's say we'd had lots of complaints that dealing with customers wasn't very good, staff didn't really know what they're talking about, they weren't very helpful to customers, maybe they were rude to customers on the phone and doing a lot of kind of damage to the company. So you make sure they're well educated, you put them on courses on kind of customer care and how to answer the phone nicely and how to deal with difficult customers in a diplomatic way and so on. And they come back from their course, that's the change, and the first few days are nice as they could be to customers, but then if you're not careful you find they revert to type, and these lessons are kind of lost and you slide back to where you were. You have to make sure that having gone through the pain that it's not wasted and that you refreeze. The second element of refreezing is essentially to give people a rest. I've said that this process of change is actually very tense for many people. A lot of turmoil in that, a lot of extra work in the change process. You must let them actually enjoy the fruits of their labour. You must let the new system kind of settle down, give them a rest for about a year before you change it radically again. There are some businesses which seem to be in a perpetual state of change, where they change this 3 months, then as soon as they kind of got that under the belt, there's another change and so on. And people never get to profit from or enjoy or appreciate the changes that have been put through, and people become almost exhausted by this constant change. Styles of change management, we've talked about this a little bit. Education and communication we talked about is very, very important. We talked about collaboration and participation. Then we have what's called intervention, the change agent keeps the change agent as really the manager who's responsible for the change, retains control, but actually delegates to people, maybe suggests that customers are dealt with slightly differently and so on, but nevertheless the change agent keeps control. There is direction, the use of authority. You in a way tell people what to do, tell them fairly strongly what to do. And there's a small distinction, I never think it's very clear here, between direction and coercion or edict. So direction is kind of saying, I think you should, and coercion or edict is more or less saying you must or you will not do that. And we're getting a kind of, more and more kind of dictatorial methods of change as we go up through that list. And finally, Beer and Nohria, the Theory E and Theory O approach to change. Theory E, think economics. This is what they call a hard approach to change, where the required changes and the successive changes are really measured by shareholder value, which is basically the profits there. So we go in kind of pretty well feet first here, and after increased profits, and it tends to mean maybe a lot of layoffs, a lot of downsizing, a lot of closing different plants and so on here, to drastically cut the cost side usually of the business, so that shareholder value, basically profits of the business, are going to be improved. Theory O is a soft approach here, where instead of just being driven by shareholder value here, what they want to really encourage is a longer term change maybe in corporate culture through individual and organizational learning. So maybe rather than closing down at a stroke a particular factory, these people are, without really talking about it, just taking that executive decision, maybe they will go in, and it's more of a participative change, really. How can we maybe allow this factory to survive, but maybe what we have to do is to get people to change some of their work practices in the factory, so that it becomes more efficient. Maybe what we agree is that your real reward is kind of keeping your job, but we won't be able to give maybe any pay rises for some years. So they probably don't get the fast improvement in shareholder value, but longer term there may be benefits in that organization, insofar as people maybe feel more loyal to it, it gets a good reputation, maybe there's good PR and so on going on. It was suggested that neither is correct, that the first one, the Theory E, is too harsh, and maybe the second one, Theory O, is too soft. Maybe it doesn't focus quite enough on shareholder value. It's almost getting back to the Blake and Mouton managerial grid. We had the concern for the people, which is kind of Theory O almost, and we have got concern for the results, which is really kind of Theory E. And we said that the best sort of a manager was the one who had very high concerns for both of those. And here, I won't go through all of these here. We'll go through just a couple of them. They're all in your notes. So here, if we look at the goal that people are seeking under these methods, under Theory E, the economic theory, the goal is to maximize shareholder value, maximize profits, maximize share price. Under Theory O, it is to maximize the capabilities of the organization, I suppose in the belief that long term this is going to maximize shareholder value. Theory is a bit shorter term maximization of shareholder value. And what the combined is to kind of recognize that these are kind of pulling against each other a little bit. There will be an imperative, certainly maybe not to make losses, to stem losses, to turn a loss into a profit. And maybe some sort of rather harsh emergency action is needed for that. But there's not much point in changing a loss into a profit if the profit then can't be sustained in the longer term by developing the organizational capabilities. Leadership, as you might think, the theory E leadership is very much top down. You'll do this, you won't come in again because you're now sacked. Whereas theory O, much more participation, much more bottom up type of approach. Reward systems, if we go down to that, motivate through financial incentives. You're really using pay and bonuses and productivity deals as a kind of big stick, perhaps, to encourage people to change or to make people change. In theory O, no one would say money is not important, but you might be appealing rather more to your long-term future in the organization, commitment to the organization, loyalty to the organization, and so on. Finally, in change management, there is the role of what's called a change agent. And the change agent is the person really responsible for pushing through the change, looking after the change, making sure it goes from the initial planning stage to the realization stage without deviating too much from the original plan. This person is responsible for getting it right, but also, of course, responsible for overcoming resistance to change, responsible for making sure we bring the change process in on budget and so on, and that the benefits we were hoping for are actually realized at the end of this change process. Often organizations will choose to have the change agent as an external consultant rather than internal. And even though employing an external management consultant in effect is very expensive, many organizations think it works better. First of all, if there's a radical change, maybe no one in the organization has got huge skills or experience in putting through complex changes. Whereas the consultant, if that's the consultant's job really, they know there's going to be resistance to change. They know that what they will have to do is maybe at some stage have a big meeting with all the people involved, educate them why the change is needed, listen to their questions, answer their questions and so on. The consultant will know that maybe a participative approach is more likely to be effective than the top-down because they're skilled in the change process. The consultant will also spend time going around, maybe in a year, maybe the consultant goes around 6 companies putting through changes for them. So this consultant comes to you having huge experience in what other companies have actually done, not with regard to the change process, but what the changes actually are. So they could be saying, well, those people, in the next town, they had a similar problem with their inventory. And what they did was they decided that instead of trying to organize delivery themselves, they would get a third-party company, a logistics company, to look after deliveries. And I think that would work very well for you because you have this national distribution problem, and to keep your own lorries going up and down the motorways and so on is not going to be efficient. So they come with some input about what changes would work. Third, they're perceived to come with what I will call clean hands, independent and fair. If someone internally is responsible for putting through the change, then people kind of look at them and say, well, first of all, they're going to create a good job for themselves. Secondly, they're going to create a bad job for me, or even maybe make me redundant because they never liked me anyway. And third, they're never going to reverse anything which they did previously, because if they reversed something they did previously, it's kind of admitting that they made a mistake previously. Whereas if you get this independent consultant coming in without any favourites, without any pet projects to preserve and so on, then people maybe respect their judgment better and then maybe make a more convincing case for the change. And finally, it's someone for management to blame. Well, that's maybe a bit harsh, but for management to transfer risk to. Remember, if it's a big transformational change, you're changing everything, or if it's a revolutionary change, you're changing everything very, very quickly. And a lot of damage can be done if the change process doesn't work smoothly. Then management would be perhaps gambling. Management would be really incurring quite high risks if it didn't make use of all the help that was available. So manager says, we're going to do this change and we're getting these skilled consultants coming in to help us now. And then management can say later on, perfectly openly, can say really to maybe shareholders, look, the change has been disappointing, it didn't go as well as we thought, but look, we got this firm of consultants in, they were really, really experienced, came with a really good reputation, and still the change didn't work. We've took all the recommendations, kind of what else could we do? It might be regarded as being rash and dangerous for management not to seek help with managing the risk that's involved in some fundamental change processes.
This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.